Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and after last week's video engaging with a comic book series that I had been neglecting for quite some time, I decided to go through my channel and see if there were any other series I had been neglecting for some time. And what do you know, I found one pretty quickly, which is why this week we're going to be talking about Lazarus number 4. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in October of 2013, we can see here on the front cover Forever, who is the Lazarus for House Carlyle, embracing Joachim, who is the Lazarus for House Moray. I have a few problems with this cover. First off, there's no background to speak of, and I know many of you have heard me harp on lack of backgrounds in the past, but this one seems to really irk me. I would have been fine with no background had it just been a close-up of someone's face or one of the characters jumping from the background into the foreground. But in this case, we just have two characters standing on non-existent ground, and it really gives the illusion that they're just floating in emptiness rather than being in any type of scenario or setting. And what makes it even worse is that where we left these characters off in the previous issue, we know for a fact that they were just alone with each other in the middle of the desert, which means that they could have drawn a very simple and generic desert background behind them that would not have taken a whole lot of effort, and it would have given so much more context to this front cover and made it more impactful. Speaking of impactful, this is my other and far more drastic complaint about this cover. This is the first point in which it's revealed to us, the readers, that Joachim is in fact a cyborg. And this feels like such a missed opportunity in terms of a big story reveal. At no point was it even inferred that Joachim was a cyborg in the previous issue. So to just throw it on the front cover as a way of revealing it to us and just being like, yep, here you go, he was a cyborg the whole time, surprise, just feels lackluster in so many ways. It would have been so much of a bigger deal to have this revealed to us within the interior of this issue as a major story point of like, holy crap, this guy was a cyborg the whole time. We didn't even know. But instead, it's just like, it almost feels like an afterthought the way they did it. Maybe it was just some wires got crossed in terms of how they were doing the interior versus how they were doing the cover, but I really think that this should not have been revealed to us in this fashion and should have been revealed within the interior of this book as part of the story. Written by Greg Rucka. Art and letters by Michael Lark with Brian Lavelle. Color by Santi Aracas. I really believe I'm saying that wrong and I do apologize. Cover by Michael Lark and Santi Aracas. Production by Michael Lark and Eric Troutman. Edited by David Brothers. The story begins with us being teleported to the Sequoia facility, which is in the Sierra Nevada mountains. This, of course, is the one of, I should say, medical facilities operated by the Carlyle family. This, in particular, is the facility where we saw Forever go to after her ordeal in issue number 1, where we see Dr. James Mann and her older sister, Bethany Carlyle, manning the stations, trying to figure out exactly why Forever has stopped right on the border between the Moray and Carlyle controlled territories. They're trying to determine exactly what's happened, and Bethany even brings up, well, maybe she just stopped to take in the sunset. And she then tells James, you could do the same. At this point, James asks, is that an order or just a suggestion? And it almost seems as if the two of them are flirting with one another. However, this moment is interrupted when suddenly all of the alarms start going off as the two of them are alerted to a horrific trauma that Forever's body has suffered. As the alarm continues to sound, the two doctors desperately try to figure out what has happened to cause all of these terrible injuries to Forever's body. James starts to list off all of the problems that have occurred. Forever having 2 compound fractures in her neck, multiple broken ribs, a horrific compound fracture in her wrist, as well as a deep puncture wound that has hit her in her thigh. However, it has missed her femoral artery. Bethany screams at him to turn off the alarm, which he does, and then wonders if it was possible that Forever crashed her vehicle and was thrown from it. However, Bethany reminds him that she hasn't moved in 5 minutes. How could she have possibly crashed? And James wonders then if she was possibly attacked, but then realizes that doesn't really make sense. Bethany states that she's going to contact her father as James tries to figure out why on earth Moray would ever try to attack her as she was leaving them instead of approaching. We then see a drone flying above the carnage as it broadcasts a picture back to Los Angeles, where Jonah is very closely monitoring the situation as he believes he is in the midst of executing his master plan. He sees that both Joaquin and Forever are unconscious on the ground, seemingly dead, and that Joaquin's vehicle has been destroyed. He then tells his men to send in the group of soldiers to make sure that the job is done, and his right-hand man, Mason, says it will be done immediately. He then wonders why the video feed suddenly goes out. The man at the keyboard explains to him that they are too close to Moray's territory and are currently dealing with their signal jamming technology interfering with the feed. He states that he's going to have to bring the drone around for another pass as their satellite feed is completely blocked by this technology. Jonah tells him to do it immediately, but the man informs him it's going to take him several minutes before he can get the drone around for a second pass. Meanwhile, back in the Sonoran Desert, we see a Carlyle helicopter approaching the scene of the explosion. As it begins to land, Forever starts to regain consciousness, and we then see an assault team exiting the chopper. Meanwhile, back at the Sequoia compound, James is keeping monitor of Forever's healing abilities and notes that her body is healing itself quite quickly as all of her rib fractures have already mended and her body has healed all of the nerve damage it suffered, and she now has regained use of all of her extremities. Back in the desert, Forever is lying on the ground, groaning in obvious pain, and we see that James explains that her body is mostly bringing itself back online. However, she will have to reset her wrist herself before that will take. He believes that she's somehow responding to some sort of stimuli as we see her trying to get back to her feet as the assault team approaches with their guns aimed at her. At this point, Bethany believes that it's some sort of threat that she's responding to, and James asks her what exactly her father said when she contacted him. Bethany then tells James that her father stated Forever's a big girl and she can handle herself. Though Forever is quite dazed in this moment as we see the officer in charge telling his subordinates to get her on her knees. This confuses her as she even notices that they are in fact Carlyle family and she asks what they're doing. Meanwhile, back in Los Angeles, Jonah is becoming more impatient by the moment. This, of course, is due to the fact that the feed is still not back up and he wants to see what's going on. Mason excuses himself, stating that he's going to check the upload bank to make sure that it's operating properly and potentially figure out a way to clear up the feed. We see one of the soldiers grab Forever by the ponytail and yank her up to her knees as Jonah tells Mason to be quick about it. We then see the lead officer tell his subordinates to hold her still as Mason makes his way not to the upload banks, but to Joanna's bedroom. As they get Forever on her knees, he pulls out a large kukri blade that he intends on beheading her with, as this is one of the only confirmable ways to actually kill her. Mason then enters Joanna's room and tells her that Jonah's plan is in full swing, and Joanna reminds him that she's already told him that she has this handled. As Forever tries to reason with the officer in charge, stating, "I am the Lazarus of House Carlyle. I command all of their armed forces. You are to put down your weapon and release me immediately." We then see that Joanna's plan is, in fact, to undermine that of Jonah's, even though Jonah thought they were all working together. She then commands Mason to hit her and make it look convincing. At this point, Forever looks up and gives the commanding officer one last chance to put down his weapon and release her. And Mason is rather reluctant to hit one of the family members that he answers to, but Joanna tells him, "This is a direct order. I'm commanding you right now to hit me in the face as hard as you can." As the commanding officer raises his blade, preparing to behead Forever, we see Mason punch Joanna clean across the face. At this moment, Forever realizes this is the opportunity she was waiting for as she lunges forward and pulls one of the soldiers who was restraining her in the path of the blade, which causes his commanding officer to accidentally cut his head off. She then screams out, "Joaquim now," as we see Joanna turn around and say, "That's not good enough. Do it again like you mean it." At this point, Forever rolls away and yanks the shrapnel out of her leg. Mason once again punches Joanna in the face as we see Forever lunge forward and stab the other man who was trying to restrain her through the gut with the piece of shrapnel. Joanna looks in the mirror and states it's still not enough. It has to look like it's real. It has to look like Jonah did it. We see one of the soldiers raise his gun up as he prepares to fire on Forever. Mason at this point is really uncomfortable with this situation, but he also realizes that as a serf of House Carlyle, he doesn't have a whole lot of options in what his next move has to be. He has to keep obeying Joanna and the commands that she's giving him. We then see the soldier who was about to fire upon Forever get a sword plunged through his neck from behind. The blade in question belongs to none other than Joaquim, and this is exactly what I was talking about at the beginning of the video. This panel is where it should have been revealed to us that Joaquim is in fact a cyborg. It would have been so much more impactful to have not really seen him in the book up until this point and have this sudden realization as we see a fully exposed cybernetic arm and half of his face ripped off, that while he is a Lazarus, he is of a completely different build and makeup than Forever is, because House Moray specializes in a completely different type of technological field than House Carlyle does. Once again, completely missed opportunity. Back at the Sequoia compound, James is shocked by the readings that Forever's body is transmitting back to their location. As he states, she's completely redlining, she's in full fight or flight mode. Back in the battle, we see that she and Jonah are working in perfect tandem, trying to fight their way through the assault team sent by Jonah. And James is trying to get a handle on everything that he's seeing and the readouts he's getting. We see that Forever is taking some hits, but her body is continuing to heal itself as she's being shot, and she continues to cut down the enemy soldiers in her wake. Bethany does not seem to be all that surprised by the reactions that Forever's body is having, as James seems to be struggling to keep up with all the data that's being transmitted back. We see that Joaquim is also taking hits. However, his body seems rather bulletproof, and it almost seems as though the shots are ricocheting off of him, as he also continues to cut down soldiers left and right. James is completely stunned at this point and can't even believe what he's seeing, as we once again see Forever kicking one soldier in the face while she seemingly cuts another one down in the heat of battle. However, at this point, Bethany explains that it's because she's defending herself. She even states, look at her saccadic reaction time, it's off the charts. We then see Joaquim slam one of the soldiers into the axle of his destroyed vehicle, and Bethany starts to really lose herself in what she's witnessing, stating, it's just beautiful, look at the way her body is reacting, it's even better than I had hoped. James is rather surprised by the way that Bethany's talking at this point, and even says, for God's sake, Bethany, someone's trying to kill your sister. We then see Forever plunge her blade into the gut of one of the last enemy soldiers as another one takes aim with his pistol. And at this point, we learn something very intriguing as Bethany turns to James and states, she only thinks she's my sister. which is quite the revelation in the story. Back in the Sonoran Desert, we see the last soldier realize that he has no chance of fighting his way out of this, as the rest of his team have all been cut down where they stand. So he drops his pistol and tries to surrender, stating, "Commander, please, I'm sorry. I was only following orders." However, it seems as though Forever has no intention of listening to this, as she plunges her blade directly into his throat and ends his existence along with the rest of his team. Now, this is a point where I actually want to take a moment to talk about both Forever and Joachim's blades. I say blades because only one of them is a sword, and that's the one that Joachim is holding. And it's really kind of weird because overall its design is very reminiscent of a katana. However, the point of the katana, instead of being on the back side of the blade along the spine, is on the front side of the blade along the edge, which doesn't seem as though it would actually be all that bad of a change to a katana blade. I don't think it would really interfere with the way it functions, honestly. And perhaps it would make it a little bit better for thrusting, which is something that katanas are not exceptionally great at. And then we get to the hot mess that Forever carries, which, by the way, is not a sword. It's a large knife. And I can tell you that because it has no pommel, and it looks to have a full tang running down between two scales. It also doesn't have a handguard to speak of. And this is a problem for a few reasons. Number one, she has no protection on her hands when she's fighting someone who also carries a sword or a large blade of some type. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's okay. If she's skilled enough, she doesn't need that protection. And okay, maybe. But it also means there's nothing protecting her hands from slipping up onto the blade. And while we're talking about the blade itself, it's just an absolute mess. We've got these serrations down here at the bottom, which I don't know how well those are showing up on camera, but they seem to serve literally no purpose. And then the knife blade starts here and is sharpened up to the point. It may be sharpened on the false edge as well. I don't know. It's not exactly told that it is, but it seems like it could be. The point is, this blade is an awful design for its intended purpose, especially given the fact that Forever is supposed to be a master of swordsmanship and hand-to-hand combat. So why would you give her a blade that is really not well designed for any of it? I mean, look at the size of the handle on this thing. It's almost as long as the blade itself. Why would she really need to use two hands in this application? The blade would probably be more nimble if it was designed with a single-handed use. It reeks of someone drawing something that looks tactical and is, as a result, not tactical in its actual design and function. We then see Forever and Joachim scan around and realize now that the battle is over. Back in Sequoia, James notices that Forever's vitals are now stabilizing and her heart rate is coming down, as he and Bethany are stuck trying to figure out exactly what just happened. Back in Los Angeles, Jonah's drone finally makes its way back around just in time to see that his assault team has been wiped out and that Joachim and Forever are both standing victorious, and he realizes that his plan failed. His tech operator, I guess, this guy's never actually named in the story, asks if Jonah wants him to make another pass. However, Jonah remains silent as he storms off towards Joanna's bedroom. As he makes his way to the door, he screams out, "It's failed. The whole plan has failed. Is she in there? Move out of the way," as he sees Mason standing out in front of her bedroom door. Mason, however, simply responds by saying no. Jonah is shocked by this, that his top man, his main subordinate, is openly defying him and is literally just like, "What in the world are you saying? Move out of the way." At this point, Mason states, "Joanna told me to tell you that if you start running now, you'll have enough of a head start to escape the Lazarus." At this point, Jonah realizes that everything that he thought was true was not. He's been betrayed by his sister, who he believed was the only person that he could count on. He realizes that everything she told him was a lie and that she had been playing him all along, all throughout their super gross romantic relationship and the planning of this hostile takeover and usurping of their family. And he knows now that Joanna was actually just trying to set up her own personal gain and was willing to basically sacrifice her brother as a means to gain the power that she's trying to get in the family. And he also knows that his only hope for survival is to run. Meanwhile, back in the Sonoran Desert, we see that Forever is planning on how she's going to get back home as she marches over towards the chopper and commands the pilot to prep the chopper for takeoff. She also then informs him that if he leaves without her, she's going to hunt him down and carve him open. The pilot realizes that she means business and immediately preps the chopper to take off as Forever goes back to Joaquim and tells him that this was not an attack on Moray and that her father would never do such a thing. Joaquim agrees with her and says, of course, as he continues to look down and to the right, as it seems as though he's rather embarrassed and doesn't want to show Forever the mangled side of his face with all the exposed cybernetics. He then says pity about the rover, and Forever tells him that he can take her bike. At this point, Joaquim finally turns and faces her, showing her exactly what he looks like underneath the flesh covering that hides his true metallic form. And the two of them share a silent look with one another. At this point, Joaquim turns and walks towards her bike and simply states, "Go well, Forever, Carlyle." And Forever responds by stating, "Go well, Joaquim Moray," as it seems that the two of them, as much as they wish things were different for them in this world, that this world just hit them both in the face, and whatever they thought they could have had outside of it seems as far away as it could have ever been. Later that evening, we see the helicopter approaching the Los Angeles compound, and as it lands and Forever exits the chopper, Mason greets her at the door, stating, "Thank God you're back." However, Forever is not in the mood to speak as she grabs Mason by the throat, as, of course, Mason was in fact the second in command under Jonah, and screams, "Where's Jonah? Where's my brother?" Mason furiously tries to tell her that he's gone, and even goes so far as to state, "He even attacked your sister. He hurt Lady Joanna." At this point, Forever is snapped out of her rage as she quickly rushes to her sister's room to find her curled up on the bed. She states, "Joe, it's me," and Joanna plays the whole thing perfectly, stating, "I tried to fight him, but I'm not strong like you. I couldn't stop him, and he just kept hitting me. Mason came in and saw the whole thing, and then Jonah ran. Jonah's betrayed us, hasn't he? He's going to come back. He's going to hurt me. I know it." And Forever grabs her sister and hugs her and states, "No, Joe, he's not going to, because I won't let him." And this is where Joanna has played the entire thing perfectly. Not only has she figured out a way to get her brother out of the picture, she's also galvanized the relationship between her and Forever and created an ally in the way that she can present this story to her father, because now Forever has seen the damage done to Joanna and will back up Joanna's story 100% to Malcolm when they tell him what happened. Later on that evening, Forever contacts her father to give him an update on the situation at hand. She informs him that Mason and Joanna are on their way to the family's main compound to join their father. And despite the fact that Joanna is very confident in Mason, Forever doesn't trust him at this point, and her father seems to agree, as Malcolm states he's going to have someone keeping an eye on Mason once they arrive. At this point, Forever explains to Malcolm all of the story as it was relayed to her by Joanna, stating that, according to Joanna, Jonah sent troops down to the southern border, and when Joanna went to go and confront him about it, he started attacking her and beating her, and he ended up beating her really bad before Mason could stop him. She then states that Joanna told her that Jonah was talking about killing both her and her father and taking over the family, and that she believes that this could be a really bad situation for them, and that when she did a sweep of the Los Angeles compound, she noticed that one of the helicopters was missing. She then informs her father that the last coordinates they were able to track the chopper at, it was heading east. Her father immediately realizes that this means that Jonah was heading towards Hawk, which is one of the enemy families that the Carlyle family has been dealing with. Forever asks if she should pursue. However, Malcolm tells her no, not as of present. In fact, tomorrow I want you to get up immediately and head towards Sequoia so that James and Bethany can both do a full examination of you and make sure your body's doing okay. But he does then tell her that he's very proud of her and that he's spoken to the Moray family, smoothed everything over, and that she's done a very good job. This brings a small smile to Forever's face, as one of the most important things to her at this moment is the approval of her father. It's something that she longs for basically all the time, and it seems to be one of her top priorities in all of her actions. He then tells Forever that she's going to be very important to the family in the coming months, and that he's going to need her by his side much of the time, and that he's going to be counting on her for a lot of things. Forever realizes the gravity of his words and says, "Yes, sir, I'll be there for you," as the transmission ends, and Malcolm stands up and hangs his head as he realizes that his family has just entered a very dark chapter, and he's not certain where things are going to go from here. The next day, as we see Forever has in fact reached the Sequoia compound, she enters her bedroom and notices that she has an email. As she opens it, she is actually quite surprised to see that it's from an unknown sender, and it simply states, "He is not your father, this is not your family," as we reach the end of the story in this issue and the beginning of a new mystery for Forever Carlyle. We then get to Forever Yours, the letter column in which all of the readers of the book can submit their letters to potentially get a response from Rucka. However, in this instance, a lot of Greg's responses don't really go anywhere, and it's not his fault. It's because the questions that people are asking are questions that he can't answer without revealing way too much of the story way too early and ruining a lot of the plot points that are coming up in later issues. That being said, there was actually one interesting letter where it was not super critical, but the reader pointed out that the timelines, which we see here on the sides of the letter columns, do leave some potential plot holes and problems in the way that they portray the fall of the old world and the rise of this new feudalism that we see in the current story. And he does ask some interesting questions about exactly how the things that are being written about in the timeline could have led directly to where we're at now. And I got to admit, a lot of his questions are pretty valid. They don't necessarily bring up huge misses in the way that the timeline's being written, but it does point out little idiosyncrasies that don't seem to make sense in terms of, how that would have allowed for the openings necessary for these super wealthy families to basically just take control of the entire world. And speaking of the timeline, this is the part where I'm going to do my best to try and speed run through the timeline that's printed up in the letter section of this issue, because it's actually pretty interesting in the backstory that it's trying to convey as a very important part of how the American government eventually broke down. So essentially, an election happened for president and both sides were claiming victory. Elizabeth Rosa Monasterio was the incumbent president, and she won the popular vote with 52.7%. However, the challenger, Harrison Silas Walker, won the Electoral College. Now, the incumbent president claimed that Walker had used faithless electors and that they were under the influence of Hawke and Bittner and that they couldn't be trusted. And she basically refused to concede victory to Walker. Now, Walker was eventually sworn in, but at this point, Monasterio decided to leave on Air Force One with the first family and head towards Seattle, as Malcolm Carlyle had already exclaimed that he was going to be backing her and believed that she was the true winner of the election. Now, on her way to Seattle, Air Force One exploded. This, of course, left a huge vacuum in her regime, and her VP, William Stoke, was sworn in her place. Now, again, this creates a problem as we have two people both claiming to be the President of the United States. The breakdown happened pretty quickly afterwards as Walker started declaring martial law around Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia and basically all of Maryland and Delaware and Connecticut to maintain power over that region of the country. Whereas Vice President Stoke, who was now the actual, or as he claimed, actual president, was trying to basically garner support on the West Coast and gained the backing of a general by the name of Char. This general was doing everything he could to support Stoke, and at this point, everything just started to really hit the fan. Walker claimed that the Carlyle family were the ones behind the attack on Monasterio, and they were the ones who fired upon Air Force One and blew it up. However, Carlyle vehemently opposed this narrative and stated that he was innocent. Stoke, of course, believed him, as well as General Char. At this point, full martial law just goes into effect on the entire eastern seaboard and basically everything east of the Mississippi, whereas Stoke and his faction had taken over everything west of the Mississippi, this becoming the new quote-unquote Mason-Dixon line, as we now had a central divide between both of these factions. Eventually, Stoke was captured by Walker's forces, and they broadcast a trial and subsequent execution of him. At this point, Char was the only one left in a leadership role under what the old regime was, and the Walker faction was basically doing everything they could to try and kill him, take him out of the picture, and take back control of the entire country. However, they failed to assassinate him, and at that point, he went to Carlyle. Malcolm Carlyle basically pledged that he was going to be aligned with Char, however, on the condition that he would be the one in charge if he was going to be lending all of his private military support behind Char's faction. Char, of course, had no other recourse at this point, like he was stuck between a rock and a hard place, so he basically joins forces with Malcolm Carlyle so that they can go head to head with Walker, who has the backing of Bittner and Hawke. Now, that's a lot to take in, but it actually makes a lot of sense when you read it, and I apologize if I didn't explain it all that well in my speed run through it. But one thing that I found very interesting in the timeline was at no point do they ever actually state who Walker and Monastario's political parties actually were, which is brilliant storytelling. And the reason it is because in the context of this story, their political factions and parties are completely irrelevant because underneath all of it, they were being played the whole time by these billionaire corporate families who were going to ultimately seize power and take over the entire globe. So revealing their parties makes no sense because at the end of the day, their parties were completely irrelevant. It's really subtle and it's never told in specifically that manner, but when you really start to take it apart, you understand how really brilliant that level of storytelling is, as they're basically taking any kind of political debate out of the backstory and just showing you this is what led to where we're at now in this weird feudalist, semi-fascist society that exists in the current realm of this book. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Lazarus number 5, where we see this is the beginning of a new story arc called Lift Part 1. We also see Forever depicted as a child, which means that we'll be likely getting some backstory as to what her upbringing was and how exactly she became the woman that we see depicted in the first 4 issues of this comic. And that was Lazarus number 4. Overall, I don't dislike this book, but I do have a couple of problems. Number 1 that I already talked about was the swords, specifically Forever's sword / really big knife. I don't like the design, and I went over exactly why. The other issue I have, and this one's kind of a sticking point for me in a lot of ways, when the assault team first lands and approaches Forever, there was no reason for them to not just pump her full of lead before they grabbed her. They saw that she was awake. They saw that she was getting to her feet. She was conversing back and forth with them. And being that they knew what a danger she actually was, it seems like it would have behooved them to not take any chances and just, play it safe, unload your guns on her, and then while she's, trying to heal from that, and granted, yes, her body can heal from damn near anything, but it takes time, they would have had all the time in the world to then behead her and complete the mission as they were instructed. And this could have all been avoided had Rucka written it where instead of her getting up and pretending to be way more groggy and injured than she actually was, if she had just pretended to instead be completely unconscious, that would have definitely created a situation where the guards would, of course, not felt like they needed to shoot her or be wary of what she might do to them. Whereas the way it's presented, it just seems like her defense was that she had plot armor on. But then again, these are just my opinions. Your opinion may be that Rucka wrote it just fine and that it came across exactly the way that it needed to, and nothing about that seems weird at all. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.